Everybody, welcome to the Easy Spotlight podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Charles Cai on this beautiful Sunday. Charles, how you doing today?
Hey, doing well, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. Excited for our conversation.
I appreciate you coming on. And I think we were just talking before this a little bit about you dealing with a new injury and kind of a shift. And maybe this is a good time to have a conversation that's a bit more reflective and talking about some of the stuff that you've done before and where you're going before, but kind of set the scene for what you've been kind of doing over the last few years is you've jumped into the endurance world. I mean, you've taken it on leaps and bounds. It seems like you really jumped in there. You're doing all these crazy races, crazy times. So just to kind of start off, like where is your sporting background? And how does that kind of relate to your working world? Like, just give us a background of who you are and how you kind of got into the sporting world.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think one of my strengths and also maybe one of my weaknesses is when I get into something, I kind of take it to the extreme. So kind of get into that so far with ultra marathons in the past few years. But growing up, I played sports really from the age of 6: baseball, basketball, soccer. I was always into watching sports, playing it growing up. Um, I picked up golf when I was 8, just on a family vacation to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is kind of like a golfing mecca, which maybe you've been to from North Carolina. But started off going to the driving range with my dad, and then we go to the par 3 course, and then each year we kind of come back for an annual family vacation. And wasn't necessarily naturally very talented at golf. Remember, I was 10 years old, and my parents signed me up for my first tournament. I still have the banner kind of from that tournament. I shot, I think it was 109, 114, 114, and I think I finished last place. This is a tournament in, South Carolina, where you have these kids that are 8, 9, 10 that have been playing since the age of 4. Obviously you're playing in pretty forward tees, but these kids are shooting like even par, under par on these short courses, and I'm, hacking around. But kind of really like saw that almost as like a wake up call of, wow, these kids are good. And if I want to like keep playing, I got to work pretty hard. And so, kind of made the decision when I was 12. I remember, coming back from the summer camp, whereas in Beijing is kind of language immersion, and they're international kids, these 2 brothers from Norway who, were world-class violinists, and was asking them, how many hours a day do you practice? And they were saying, 6 hours a day, really like it was eye-opening, the kind of level of commitment you need to be truly, expert at the craft. So I remember coming back and telling my parents, I wanted to focus on golf. Because growing up, it was always my dream to be, a professional athlete, and quickly realized, baseball, basketball, I wasn't going to have, the genetics, the height, the speed to make it there. So I figured golf is kind of maybe my best shot. So, from middle school and high school on, I kind of focused on golf each year, just kind of got better and better. I wasn't any kind of, leaps and bounds, but, also ran cross country in high school. But that was kind of more just for fun. A lot of my friends in high school were doing it. And honestly, back then I hated running. So it was really just kind of like this off season. How do I stay in shape, stay active, but just continue to focus on golf, and kind of set my mind on playing in college. And so I was always a, pretty good student, but not, anything outworldly, but wanted to use kind of this intersection of golf and academics, and was focused on a couple schools at the end in the recruiting process, narrowed it down to Dartmouth and Yale, and then loved my time visiting Dartmouth, really connected with the coach, the team, and so was lucky enough to be able to commit and go there, and played 4 years at Dartmouth, was the captain my senior year, and just had a great time. And it was, a big part of both my identity. In high school, I remember everyone knew me as the golfer, because that was, what I was kind of best at, and almost embraced and relished in having something to be known for. And then, yeah, continued to be a big part of college as well. And then once I graduated, still played, a little bit, but kind of once I went from, competing at a, pretty high level, to just playing, every other weekend or so, weekend warrior, it didn't have that same appeal, in terms of just, I knew I wasn't going to be competitive. I was never going to reach that same level without, putting in the same amount of time. So, had shifted, kind of focused, and, got into, running a bit. So for the first few years after college, ran casually, signed up for a half Ironman just for, kind of the sake of it, kind of as this challenge. This was back in 2018. And, I enjoyed kind of the grind, but also at that time, there was a lot of other things that I really liked doing in terms of just socially with work. So it felt more of like a burden in terms of getting in the training for that triathlon. So after that, took a little bit of time off, and then that was fast forward to 2020, the pandemic, everything kind of slowed down. You mentioned you got into golf, like that was kind of running for me, coincided with a move to the Bay Area in San Francisco. And so with everything shut down and the access to the trails and nature here, got into trail running and cycling, and then wanted to try and kind of test myself and see what the ultra marathon scene was like. And so signed up for a 50K, started training for that, and then once I finished that, it was kind of like, okay, what's next? And always had this dream of running 100-miler at some point in my life. And when I first kind of heard about these races, the first thought was, that sounds impossible, or there's no way that's something I could do with the current amount that I run. But I think with each successive kind of race and being immersed in the scene, it started to feel more and more possible. And then last year was fortunate to run my first 100 at the Leadville 100, which was a race that I first heard about when I was learning about ultra marathons, and one that had a lot of appeal in my mind. And it went about as well as I could have hoped. I was lucky enough to have friends, my girlfriend, Lynn, there to crew and pace. Mia Rose, one of our good mutual friends, was there as well. Extremely supportive. And just, it was a special day.
That's amazing. And that's such a good intro you've just done there to cover all of that. And I think I'm going to go back through all of that story essentially, and we're going to kind of pick it apart, because I think you've done an amazing job covering it there. And I just want to go all the way back. So let's stay 12 years old, okay? Because you've gone on to do some amazing things right now in terms of running 100-miler, and there's a lot of different themes, and in terms of people in the 20s, early 30s, they go through these stages of how they view running as well. So we'll get to that. But you said at 12, you consciously made a decision that you needed to work essentially harder if I'm going to be any good at that. That to me seems a very young age to have that conscious thought. And that, but my experience is playing soccer, I just love playing it, and I practiced naturally. It was just fun for me. But I don't think I ever had the thought, oh God, I need to do this. I just enjoyed it. Why do you think that was the thought you had?
I think part of it is I really enjoy the feeling of trying to master something, or whenever there's something I really get into, I want to see kind of how good can I be, and also if it is a competitive thing, kind of how can I ultimately be the best that I can, and also the people I compete and play with. Like, there's always been something that's driven me, and in some ways it's kind of pushed me towards things that maybe I have a little bit more of an aptitude or the ability to exceed with more work, as opposed to I've tried a lot of things where I have no talent and no inclination towards, and found I never really got into it. So artistically, musically, those are a number of things that came naturally, and tried them, but realized I didn't have that same kind of desire and in some ways ability to be extremely to excel in those. So yeah, there's just been something where it's like I want to be able to do really well and push myself in terms of what I decide to spend my time on.
That's awesome. And the next kind of thing is that identity. You were the golfer kid, in college. In college, growing up in high school, you're moving away, finish college, um, and a lot of athletes go through that period. And talk to other people on here, and they had this experience of like, okay, do I want to change my identity? I no longer want to be known as Charles the golfer, something the basketballer, Ryan the soccer player. What was that experience for you? In kind of, did you actively want to leave it behind, or how did you feel enjoying that period?
Yeah. I think the transition kind of started in college to an extent. High school is really, golf and school. Those were, I'd say 95% of my time. And then you come to college where, for me, golf was still a big focus, but really within the first year or two, I knew probably I wasn't going to play professionally, or this wasn't, a sustainable career for me. And so I, dove more into, certain social aspects of college, join a fraternity, really like it felt like it became less of my only identity. Is still a big part of me, but having, people that didn't see me initially as just Charles the golfer, I think kind of like um, start to shift my mind away from how do I, just be the best at this, and find other things that bring me kind of joy and excitement to dive into. And then I think naturally, once I finished college, you start working, you don't have the same amount of time really to dedicate to golf. And wasn't that necessarily I was trying to run away from it, but I think it was just, it's hard to especially during the week to get out and play. If you're working a job, it's a lot easier to go for a run or go to the gym than it is to get out and play 18 holes. And so there's a piece that was kind of like, I feel satisfied with my golfing career, and there didn't feel like there was more that I felt both capable of achieving, and really like that path in terms of continuing to spend time on it. So just naturally drifted towards other, athletic endeavors, so to say.
Right. And it's funny with running because I myself went through it kind of after the college thing, and it's transitioned for various reasons. But running is, you explained it in there when you were in college, when you were playing golf, you kind of view running as a means to an end in order to perform the sport I really want to do. Oh,
Yeah.
it's an off-season activity that I do. So, oh, I can play soccer, but I run just so I can play soccer better. And then you go through this period of, I'm never going to run a marathon. A marathon sounds stupid. Why would I run 26? I'm never going to run a 50. And then all of a sudden you start running and you start like, I actually like this. Maybe I can be good at this. And these kind of endorphins start flying around. What was your experience when you were first starting to get into running? And like, when do you think the moment switched that you were like, I really like this. I could do this a lot more.
Yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, definitely running initially, like in high school, was just, it almost felt like punishment in ways. I remember, fourth grade gym class, everyone has to run a mile, and I was one of the slowest people like in our whole class and grade. So it didn't come necessarily naturally. It didn't have, a ton of speed, but it's just something, in college, kind of in the off season, I do every once in a while just to like clear my mind, get out in nature. And then once I graduated, ran a little bit more consistently, but again, we're talking, 3 to 4 times a week, nothing more than, 4 or 5 mile run. I was living in DC at the time, and there's a pretty big road race, the Cherry Blossom 10 miler. So I remember signing up for that a few times, and, like training a little bit, and I say training pretty loosely compared to what I'm doing now, but, I would follow a plan or talk to some of my friends who knew what they were doing, and realized I liked a little bit of that structure of, even if it was kind of a short training block, just following some workouts and having a little bit more routine. And then I remember having a pretty good race for not really considering myself a runner. I think it was 2017, 2018, where I ran like 66 minutes for the 10 miler, which is just over 6:30 pace. And so for not running, a whole lot, I was pretty happy with that and thought, I'm not going to be qualifying for the Olympics anytime soon, but it felt like, pretty respectable. And then it was like the following year where that's where I wanted to try and do a half Ironman. Thought naturally from doing a half marathon, half Ironman's next, and realized I was a terrible swimmer and not a great biker. So kind of throughout that, I realized like of the three, I definitely enjoyed running the most. And then it took a little bit of time off there, 2018, 2019, still ran casually, but I had other kind of priorities at that point, socially, and then was playing a lot more volleyball, softball, went to Taipei for a few months for work. And so running was kind of on the back burner. But then when I came back, this was kind of a few months before the start of the pandemic, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I wanted to try and do a marathon for the first time. And so signed up for a marathon of April 2020, was training kind of, the first few months of 2020. And then, pandemic hit, race was canceled. And at that point I finished pretty much all of the training. So I wanted to still do it, and ended up running my first marathon on my high school track. So, it was 105 laps, turned it into kind of like a charity fundraiser for COVID. And then, the funny thing is, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought I was just going to lose my mind. But I remember kind of towards the end, the last few miles, like one of the thoughts I had was, okay, like what's next? It was almost like I was already looking forward to, seeing what else I could do. And that kind of like planted the seed. And then once I moved out to San Francisco a few months later, that's where I started reading more about ultra marathons and trail running. And then kind of, once I signed up and trained for that first 50K, it just kept on going from there and pushing myself more and more.
So the marathon that you did on your high school track, is that was just you? It wasn't an event. It was you saying, I'm just going to run a marathon and it's going to be in a loop and I'm going to punish myself doing this 106 laps.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, my parents were out there. My dad set up a little aid station with a water bottle that hit every lap. Had a couple high school friends come out, run a few miles with me, but definitely no sanctioned event there.
That's awesome. And what was the motivation? Because there's not that I have a thing against people running events for charity reasons or whatever, because I think that gets a lot of people out and gets a lot of do things. But I think there's a lot of power to doing something difficult just for the reason of I want to test myself, and doing 106 miles in maybe the most mundane fashion kind of says that to me. So why did you pick that kind of, what internally is going on in your head thinking, I want to do this? Is it just a COVID? I just want to push myself, or
yeah, it was kind of, well, originally I think, I had done all of the training, and so I wanted to still run kind of 26.2 miles. I was going to just, pick a route in our kind of town's towpath, but then I don't know what it was, like this kind of, at first it was like, wow, it'd be a crazy, absolute psycho move to run a marathon on a track. But then it kind of like, dug in my brain. And then, I was like, actually, maybe, part of it was, just do it for the story and have a cool, anecdote. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do it. And then, figure I could also, make it a good cause, raise a little bit of money. And then, but it was just like started off as a, silly idea, and then it just stuck with me.
That makes sense as a great foundation for then you to go into the more difficult races. If this is your first introduction into the marathon, just running in a circuit, you're like, okay, I like doing this kind of hard stuff. So from there, you then, and I'm going to point people in the direction of also reading your blogs on Medium, because I went and read them, and there are all these post-race reviews, which is super interesting, super detailed to get behind your thinking, your training process, in going into 100Ks, your 100 miler, doing your first marathon, trying to qualify for Boston, and all this different stuff. So you've done your first marathon around the track. You're now thinking, okay, I want to jump into this. And the thing I noticed from reading your things is that you're quite, to me, it seems like you're quite a very detail oriented person, process oriented. And I think a lot of people have these ideas of, I want to go and run a 50K and I want to go and do this and that. And yep, they'll go and do it maybe, but the way you seem to approach it, I'm getting that it's different. You're going into this as, I want to do the absolute best I can. I want to absolutely give myself the best opportunity. Is that the way you approach your first? Because was it Milwaukee? Was that the first one that you did?
Yeah, yeah, me
And is
walk.
that your approach that you go into these things with? You jump in like that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And it's kind of cool. You kind of pick that out from just how I talk about it. And funny story, the other day I was running with a friend here in the Bay Area, or someone I met through running, and then I said something about my age, and she was like, "Oh, I would have, actually, would have guessed you were older just by the way you kind of like the mature approach you take to training and everything around it." Because, like you said, like when I want to do something, I want to do it, give it my all, and be put in the best position I can to succeed. And so that starts with training. So when I first got into it, started working with a coach, someone who I used to work with professionally before. Was reading a lot of books about training theory. Really like wanted to become kind of a student of the sport. And so it's not only with just the run training, but with ultras, there's you have the whole nutrition aspect, you have the rest, the recovery. These are all the strength training. Like there's so much that goes into like really getting the best out of yourself when it comes to ultra. And it just felt like this big puzzle piece of how do I fit this all in with my schedule and working a full-time job. And so I really like the challenge of having to prioritize, being disciplined, having training laid out, and going into every race I have a very detailed spreadsheet for nutrition, like what I'm going to eat. And so I try to be prepared as best I can, and then take it from there.
And talk about the power of a coach just for a second, because you can shout your coach. Is it Will
Yeah,
something?
Will Weidman.
And you got the coach before you did the 50K then?
Yeah. It was kind of like right when I was when I had this idea. I was first reached out to him just to pick his brain. I was like, this is something I'm thinking about, and then he happened to mention he's starting to get into coaching, and I figured again, it's like there's so much about this world that I don't know, and some people like kind of doing trial and error, and I think that's totally a fine approach. But I looked at him; he had a lot of ultra finishes and experience, and so it was like, he seems like a great person to learn from. And if I want to start, I want to, kind of do it right, and try and understand like how do I get to a point where maybe one day I can, run and finish a 100 miler.
And can you explain the power of a coach, or maybe the process as well that goes along with it? Because I think a lot of people, let's just say in the amateur realm of getting into ultras or just running or sports in general, well, you have to put the value on it. And it's kind of funny. I was talking about golf in this way the other day. It's like maybe when you first get into golf, you view it as a very, such an expensive sport. I don't want to go and pay 50, $100 to play around. And as you get a little bit better and you start enjoying that time being outdoors, that value shift of that money is like $50. Great. Let's go spend for 4 hours outside. And for coaching, especially in the running thing, you're like, I can go and run myself. Why do I need a coach to tell me how to run?
Yeah.
So, what's the power that you found in having a coach? And also, how do you kind of work with him? What does he lay out for you?
Yeah. So I think really, I mean, no matter your running experience, I think there are different aspects of working with a coach that can help. I think when you're just getting into it, right, um, it's less about it, contrasting it with golf, the coach, a lot of it's like about the technique, your swing, and like giving you kind of fine details about what you should change. And running, rarely do you need to change your running form. In kind of extreme examples, maybe there's certain cues, but a lot of it is providing kind of prescriptive guidance on training, workouts, how much mileage you should be doing. I think even for experienced athletes, it's like having a coach that can look at your holistic training and tell you actually when you need to kind of pull back, or, if you're dealing with an injury or kind of a nagging issue. It's, a lot of ultra runners are type A. They want to push themselves. But I think for longevity and one of the actual skills that you need to be successful in ultras is actually know when to kind of pull back, or being able to like listen to your body, the signals it's sending. And so having a coach that can objectively say, hey, actually, I think you should take this workout off, or, hearing like what you're going through and being able to provide that high level lens and objective feedback, as opposed to you being in the moment. It's kind of, I'm going to push through, I'm going to do this, extra workout, extra mile, and being able to rein in. But, from a, if you're just getting into it, I think it's important to know how to build up kind of safely, learn about all of the other things that come into running, that the strength training, the recovery, the stretching, the foam rolling, understanding like from a workout perspective, being prescribed, specific paces and intervals. And I think even with ultras, you're running, not as fast as marathons or anything shorter, but it's still important to be as fast as you can be, and raise kind of, your VO2 max, your threshold, because that'll kind of raise your ceiling in terms of running, even though, you're rarely running faster than 10-minute pace for, these 100-mile plus races. You still want to be an efficient, economical runner.
That's huge, right? And I think specifically your point on coach being that essentially alternate eye who can, especially for athletes who have grown up in an environment with coaches and the whole thing. I think when you finish college or finish sports and you kind of go off in your own, and you think you know a lot. I think that's been my experience anyway. I think I can train in the gym. I know I can start running. I can do all of this stuff. Why do I need to start paying a coach? But then I've had so many issues from a load perspective, because I don't know how to manage my load running. I've never had this thing. So that person to dial you, get you on the right track and pull you back and push you is huge.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who, when they're training for their first marathon, end up getting injured in some capacity, have to take some time off, and then, then try and run it, and then, depending on how it goes, maybe get injured again. But I think really when you're first building into running and getting that consistent base, that's when you're most vulnerable or susceptible to an injury. And so it's like, how do I navigate kind of this initial base building, getting your body accustomed to running consistently, build up your mileage. And so having someone who's seen a lot of examples can kind of guide you through, I think is really, really important.
That's huge. That's my notes taken down, is to go out there and make sure I get my coaches going forward, because I need the help. So going into the distance races now, you've done Milwaukee, you've done the Canyons 100, and then Leadville.
Mm-hmm.
Although you had a coach, he's got you there. What did you experience out there? Maybe in your first event, what was the experience out there that you couldn't prepare for it? Nobody could prepare you for it.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I've been pretty fortunate in which so far all of these races I haven't hit an extreme low or something where it's just been like an impossible wall to climb, which I think is I've been pretty fortunate, where a lot of times in 100-mile or these long races, people will get to the point where they want to drop out, or they hit this again like proverbial wall, and then somehow push through, make it to the other side. And I think a lot of that's a testament to my coach Will, and kind of the preparation that we put into it. And it's always felt like now looking back, having more experience, I know in some ways is maybe over prepared, or definitely prepared to meet the demands of it. And so it starts with the training, the mental preparation that goes into it, planning everything out. So you're not kind of scrambling on the day of the race, and then being able to go in with kind of a conservative race plan, and then not start off too strong and be able to finish strong. And so all these things, I mean, Canyon's, one of the unique things was it was extremely hot that day. I think hit close to a high of 90, and so just dealing with extreme heat, being out there for 12 plus hours. And but you really learn to take care of yourself first and foremost, and a lot of it's kind of troubleshooting on the fly. So maybe you start to feel a wiggle in your hip, or you're getting low on calories. It's like, okay, I have this toolbox of ways to try and remedy the issue, and you're kind of always problem solving on the fly. And so kind of in some ways harken it back to golf, where maybe you're out on the course, that your swing's not working that day, or normally you're playing a draw, but today for some reason you can't draw, and the ball is going left to right. It's like, okay, how do I play it on today's round? And you can't just stop in the middle, go to the range and work on it. You kind of have to finish it out. And then so a lot of that I feel like I've taken from those days, and it's just using your mental toolkit to troubleshoot out there.
That's awesome. And then building up to Leadville, because from what it seems, when you first got into the ultra distance, that 100-miler mark seems to be kind of a goal that was always at the back of your mind to get there, and you did. So can you kind of explain that Leadville race and maybe what it meant to you, or what your takeaway at the end of it all was?
Yeah, I think so. I did my first 100K. That was Miwok in 2022. And the plan was later that fall to kind of do my first 100-miler. Thought natural progression, first did a 50K, and then I did a 50-miler later that fall. And then that following spring, I did Miwok 100K. So naturally, kind of the next distance was a 100-miler. But I found actually after Miwok, I was, I felt, I wouldn't say burned out, but definitely like by the end of that training block, I was like, okay, I had to make a lot of sacrifices from, a social and lifestyle standpoint in order to fit in all that training. So it's kind of like, I just want to, run for fun for the rest of the year. Did some trail adventures with friends that summer. And then later that year was when I did my first official road marathon. And so that was kind of a good change of pace, where you're going from long days in the mountains to more kind of flatter, faster road training. And so that was a nice way to switch it up. And then the following year, 2023, that was when I was like, okay, I feel, rejuvenated, ready to tackle this 100-miler. And so went into the year with, Leadville as the goal in August. And then Canyons was, a nice build up and way to kind of get into it and split up the year. So, going into Leadville, I felt extremely prepared. I think, I mean, as prepared as you can feel for your first 100-miler, even though at that point I had done 200Ks, it still feels incredibly daunting, because you're going from 62 miles being the longest you ever run to 100, which is, more than a 50% increase. Right. And so, especially also going up to altitude, luckily I was able to get out there a few weeks before to acclimate. And then, but it still kind of hits you, even just walking around, and the day before the race, walking up the stairs and just completely winded. It's like, man, how am I going to run 100 miles here? But there's just, it's just amazing, like what the body is capable of, and kind of going above and beyond like what you do in normal day to day. And so it's really, you hear all these stories of people being put in, I almost think like life or death situations, and when your adrenaline kicks in, and you just do these crazy things. And that's kind of how I view like ultras, is you're doing something crazy. You're going from, running this normal amount day to day, and then it's like on a single day you're going 10x above what you're doing. And so it was a special day, as I mentioned, having Mia Rose there, my friend Trillium, my girlfriend Lynn. They're all there, so supportive. They all helped pace me at the end. So they all ran about a 13-mile stretch. And so to be able to finish at the end with them, and to actually feel pretty strong the whole race. So I started off pretty conservatively, and just slowly worked my way up. I think like every aid station timing checkpoint, I, moved up further and further in the field. So the first 13 miles is in like 100th place. And then at the finish, made it all the way to 25th. And so that kind of motivation as well, where you're passing people and feeling strong, it just builds on itself. And then crossing the finish line, it was almost like I felt the past few years, all the training and all of the work that went into it kind of like flashed before my eyes, like crossing that finish line. And it was just, yeah, I definitely broke down a little bit at the end, because it was a dream I've had for a long time.
That's amazing. And you in there mentioned so many different things, and the fact that I'd say from reading what you say and the way you're talking about it as well, it's like it was successful from start to finish in a way. Not to say that other things didn't go along, but it kind of goes back to your preparation, and that there's many more things that you can go on. But I want to talk now about the kind of impact on life. You've mentioned it in different areas, and one of the kind of whole points about this podcast is, people do things, whether it's running, whether it's start a business, wherever, because they have an internal motivation to do it. You also have to live in the real world. You have to make money every day. You have to go to work, So it's really about understanding how, why, challenges.
Mhm.
And so I want to go there first. I'll start at what has running ultra marathons done for you in your everyday life beyond just being a super fit human?
Yeah, I think it's given me, further confidence in the fact that, when hard things come up, when unexpected things come up in life, whether that's work, personal relationships, or whatever it may be, this kind of confidence of, in some ways, like, okay, I've run 100 miler, like I can get through this, challenging meeting or this conflict. And it's like knowing that, at the end of the day, it's going to be okay. And it's, how do I kind of problem solve and take things, one thing at a time, and work through it. Like just this ability to realize, you can and have done really hard things. And so um, that's, I think, one of the biggest things I think it's given me. And then also, again, like in some ways a distraction or a purpose or something that I feel like I'm working towards, where, I usually have a race that I'm building towards, or, I've felt most driven when I've had a goal that I'm working towards throughout my life. So starting with golf, and then, the half Ironman, and now all of these races, it's like, in some ways it feels like purposeful of how do I direct my energy, my focus. I love that challenge of fitting the pieces together with everything that's going on in my life.
And you've picked a time consuming sport. So what do you feel in that you're sacrificing? Because you kind of mentioned it after your first 50K, and that, from a social perspective, there's a lot of things that you're now missing out on. You've then gone back into it, done more 50Ks than 100 milers, which I'm assuming way more time.
Yeah.
So maybe from a relationship standpoint, or just a life standpoint in general, do you feel as if you're sacrificing, or has there been a shift?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and it's funny how, over the course of your life, your priorities change, and what you value is important changes, and how that makes such a big difference in terms of your perception of what feels like a sacrifice or not. So, for my first 50 miler, first 100K, it definitely felt like socially I was making a lot more sacrifices. Like, in the month leading up to the race, I would cut out alcohol. And so not being able to go out on a Friday or Saturday night when my, friends were, or, at that point, like trying to date while you're, being sober is a little bit tougher. And so there are those aspects, I think, that felt like, okay, I can't wait to be done with this, to be able to drink again, to go out with friends. And then, this over this last year and a half, and partially, I've joked with Lynn, my girlfriend, who, I've known for a while, and we've started dating. She lives in New York at the moment, is moving out, but we've been long distance. And being in a long distance relationship has been, great for training, because, I don't have to worry about a lot of those things. I've, over the last year, I've more or less cut out alcohol, I think, except for, special occasions like weddings. but day to day kind of, that has been both a big help in terms of like recovery, the sleep, like, during the week, I try to go to bed pretty early, and when alcohol is not impacting your sleep and being able to get on a consistent bedtime routine, you're waking up at the same time, waking up feeling good, being able to take advantage of the mornings, like it what used to feel like a sacrifice now is just like, this is something I want to do. Like, I want to wake up Saturday morning early and, do a long run in the mountains, and also finding, a great community here in the Bay Area that have similar values. It's like, I can get a lot of, my social connection through these, group runs, these group workouts, and spending time with folks outdoors. And it's, you're kind of killing two birds with one stone, where you're getting in your training, you're getting to see your friends. And so that's almost kind of helped, scratch that itch of a lot of the discipline it takes of doing something like this at a high level.
There's a great way to put it, in that shift in kind of seasons in your life, and where your priorities are, and what once was so difficult now is actually the thing you look forward to. But let's talk identity, because at one time you were the golfer, kid, and if we're talking about seasons in life, if someone was to meet you now, they'll be like, Charles the runner, Charles the ultra marathoner. And I read in one of your blogs, you said, it's important, I'm going to read this quote verbatim so I don't mess it up. It's important I don't base my happiness and identity on being able to race. And this may be right now very poignant, because you've just had this injury that's going to affect you for some time. You're going to have to work through some stuff. One, what gives you firstly the foresight to kind of even know that? Because I definitely went through this last year. Identity, I'm the active person, I can do all these things. So what kind of first gave you the foresight to do that? And are you achieving that? Are you living up to your word?
Man, that could not be more timely, just, with this injury. So, I'm signed up for Miwok again this year in just under 2 weeks, but with this ankle injury, it's not looking good. And so, having to kind of reevaluate and in some ways, it hasn't been a crazy serious injury where I'm out, hopefully for, months or a year, but still feeling like you're losing a little bit of that piece of yourself. And I think, it's one thing to kind of be able to say that and realize that, and then I think it's another to truly internalize it, and I think I'm definitely working on that piece. And in this this past week, figuring out what are other things that kind of make me happy, or how do I look past this race that I'm going to be missing, and finding other things to look forward to, in some ways, like once I'm back. And so it's this injury is tough because, I'm pretty much off my feet. So it's not like I can, play another sport or cross train at the moment. So it's really like everything physical is kind of off the table, which is tough because I'm a, very active person, but kind of diving into, been watching a lot of TV, been reading a lot, and just, having more time to myself, and really sitting with some of those thoughts, has been, a change, but I think has given me a period to reflect and figure out, how I want to live intentionally and continue to do some of the things that I have been doing, and make sure it's something that I really want to be doing.
And this may be a bit soon because the injury just happened, but what do you think are some of the tools that you'd use, or where does your mind go in a time like this, where it's really challenging, especially with an injury? You just physically can't move. You can't go and, as you say, cross train to kind of distract yourself. What tools are you using in order to kind of redirect your focus?
I think in some ways initially it was taking, my mindset and it was, how do I be the best at running, to how do I be the best at recovery? And, I spent hours, trying to talk to friends, going down internet rabbit holes of, rehab, and almost like taking this elite mindset and being like, I'm gonna, attack this recovery like no other and be out there as soon as I can. And so initially it gave, me of that purpose of taking all of this like desire and willpower and funneling into something. And then you quickly realize with, there's a nature of the injury where it's like you just need to let your body kind of rest and do nothing, and there's like only so much you can actually do, and it becomes counterproductive after a certain point. And so it's being able to kind of like be okay with this uncertainty of not knowing. That's been one of the tougher things is, it's not like, okay, in exactly 4 days from now, you'll be able to start biking again, because I've there has been progress kind of day to day, but there are occasional setbacks, or it's not a linear trend. And so it's just trying to be okay with that uncertainty and focus on controlling what I can control one day at a time.
One, your maturity from an athletic perspective is insane. Like, I want to be you. I want my mind to think my body just needs to rest. Just give it some time. Don't go out there and just try again. Just,
Yeah.
but to that other point, just I think is really important for people to hear and kind of refocus their brain when they're going through an injury. And for me, it's taken ages to understand this. But taking that elite level thinking, if I want to be the best here, to I can be the best at recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And that shift in focus can get you through a lot, and also allows you to still do the things of like, I'm going to research how to optimally reduce inflammation. I'm going to sleep better so that I can get better. I'm going to eat the best food. So it's going to, and it kind of can replace it in a way and give you some of those things. But it is an important thing to kind of remember when you're going through there. And just to go on to running, we talked about identity and running and maybe why you run. Because another piece that I read in there is like, of course, you've not hit the wall yet. You competing in these races. You're doing great. You're performing at a high level. And the competition, of course, you grew up an athletic person. You've been in sports, competing in college. You want to win. That's a part of it. But in one of your blogs, you said, although I'm a competitive person, it's not the reason why I run. So what is the reason why you run?
Yeah. I think it goes back to kind of this mindset of how can you better yourself each and every day. And it's, for me, like that's kind of what I took with golf, was just, and with, how I've thought about life in general, is like, okay, each and every day, like what is, one thing kind of small, or, a tangible of how did I make myself better? It might be a piece of knowledge you learned, or, even if it's just like small things, and it's just how do you just keep kind of working towards this idealized version of how you want to live your life. And day to day, like the change may be, minuscule, but over the course of weeks and months and years, it's like, that's when you start to see the change. And it's kind of reflected with ultra marathons, is you might hit these stretches where you can barely walk, but as long as you're taking a step forward towards the finish line, towards the end goal, you'll look back after a certain point and be surprised at the distance you covered and how much you've grown. And I think running has just enabled me to kind of continue to better myself. I think from a physical health standpoint, that's a large part of it. It feels like I'm living, in some ways, the idealized version from a health standpoint of how I want to live, eating healthier, getting into more of a routine bedtime, and just the physical stimulus as well. And so it's, a lot of that is the growth that I'm seeing, race to race, week to week, training block to training block, is how do I keep kind of improving.
And where do you kind of see yourself going next now? Because I feel like for you, and I also read it, and it's very apparent in the way, like you could go on to run 500 miles. If that got into your head one day, you'd figure it out, and that's where you want to go. But it seems like, when you are healthy, you are going to do the Milwaukee, which is 100K.
Yeah.
Do you kind of, how far out are you thinking? Are you thinking, let me just focus in the next 6 months what I want to do here, or do your plans typically go further?
Yeah, I think, so I have this year kind of mapped out in terms of races. I feel like in the next 3 years, I have other kind of big goals that I want to have as well. Other big 100-mile races. But I think, just coming back last month from, I was pacing and crewing a friend who did this race from LA to Las Vegas. So it's an unsanctioned race. It was 290 miles, but just kind of seeing what's possible. It started, again, planting that seed of, maybe, this, 200 miles are growing in terms of the scene. But at least for this year, like the focus and what excited me was how do I do a distance I've already done before, but improve on from a timing and pacing and how I feel, and maybe seeing, how competitive or just, improving from a time and pace standpoint. And then, but next year, maybe, okay, I want to push myself to go further, because, inevitably the further you go, the slower it's going to be. Right. So it's finding this balance of that distance to pace and effort that you enjoy. But I think, kind of viewing it more in the this year and then the next few years. And, for me, I think you want to start a family at some point. And so that, I figure once you have kids, the training will kind of take a back seat. So in some ways, it's almost like, how do I make the most out of these next few years before that becomes a possibility?
Kind of this, you're recognizing the season you're in and the opportunity, especially with Lynn being in New York, and you having essentially everything is set up perfect for you right now to go and attack this and go as far as you can with it. And honestly, I'd love to have a conversation with you down the line when your life is shifting a little bit, and seeing how the things that you've learned from this season and the going through these 100-milers then translates in, okay, how have I then moved on to this, or how have I pushed on to do even more?
And
especially because you're so detail oriented, I really want to push people to go and read your things, especially if you're ever thinking about doing 50-milers, or even reach out to you, because you see like a wealth of knowledge from your strategy perspective.
And I've also got into coaching in the last year and a half. So it's been fun sharing kind of that knowledge and that mindset, and trying to bring structure to other people, friends, and people, acquaintances. So that's been another rewarding kind of aspect of all of this.
That makes perfect sense that you're transitioning to a coach's space from how you operate and everything else. So people, if you're getting into it, you're looking to a coach, reach out to Charles. He's your man. I'm sure he's got you.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a lot of time now with this ankle.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there. Charles, I appreciate you coming on. What you're doing is awesome. I think people can learn so much from your maturity, the way you approach sports. I mean, I've learned loads in this conversation, just the way to kind of attack what I'm doing and do it in a better way. And also just kind of your philosophy of life. I think it's very balanced. That's how the perception I'm taking on. So I really appreciate you sharing your kind of learnings with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. Definitely have enjoyed this conversation.
Awesome. Everyone, keep it easy.